The humble outrider. The absolute terror of the Empire roster. And as the title suggests, the most important unit in the Empire roster. This little unit is one of the main reasons why Empire is considered the top faction in head-to-head multiplayer. The way players use this unit is what separates wheat from chaff. At the hands of an average Total War player, these units are barely worth their heavily discounted price, and at the hands of a good player, this is the unit that allows Empire to win on multiple fronts simultaneously with barely any effort. If you know how to play the Outriders, you know how to play the entire Empire roster, for their late units rely on a similar mobility, using the tanks and the land ships to protect their lines. As a side note, Elspeth makes these units so busted that any roster without powerful ranged infantry is simply lost by default. I'm not even gonna get into the gunnery school version of these units for the obvious reason. But what makes the humble Outrider such a menace on the battlefield? First is the price. The base price of 700 gold and 175 upkeep is pretty decent for a tier 2 unit. However, as Empire, you get access to absolutely busted trade goods bonuses. You see, in the Empire proper, you got easy access to 7 pastures, which all reduce the upkeep and recruitment costs by 20% per pasture at tier 1, and at tier 3 by 30%, as well as upkeep by 3% each. All in all, by mid-game, you are recruiting these guys either for free or close to free. Second is their accessibility. It's a tier 2 unit. Recruited from a tier 2 building, the base unit of Outriders can deal with just about any threat except ranged infantry. Third, rush and anti-rush potential. Under normal circumstances, whenever you are planning operations against a faction, you consider their strengths and weaknesses. In most cases as well, a faction that is strong in the late game will be weak or weaker in the early game. Empire does not have such weakness, thanks to the Outriders. You see, if for some reason you want to rush an Empire player, you have to prepare to meet stacks and stacks of Outriders that will simply laugh at your overpowered heroes, armored infantry, and monsters. If you do not bring a roster to specifically deal with them, they can and will turn your entire army to Swiss cheese. Now, fourth and the most important reason. Now, let's take a look at an example of Outrider use at the hands of a good player against AI. So, this tells me that this army is partially for auto-resolve and partially for PvP. Archers are there just to boost the auto-resolve. So let's take a look at the one unit that supposedly counters Outriders. So we've got a couple of volleys going on those war dogs. Spells going on the bats are also considered to be a good counter to Outriders, but they are really not. And you are about to see why. So what Slap does over here is he's taking advantage of the AI's tendency to blob, and blobs are perfect targets for grenade launchers. So we've got the bats engaging with the less expensive infantry, the archers, while Outriders are getting some distance from them to be able to shoot. Got that Manticore landing over ranged. Even if this was being played by a player, this would not have been too much of a difference. The bats have retreated, and now the Manticore... Ooh, a spell goes down. The archers rout. But the Manticore is going to be getting shot at. He is currently being intercepted by the wizard, who is pulling out. No, it's by an engineer hero, who is terrified right now. Terror routing. Yep. So one thing you might have seen, yep, you see Slap doing this constant pull. This is to prevent our units from pulling back and attacking back to the units that are engaging with them. Even if one model is engaging, the whole unit might come back. And pulling it and repeatedly giving this order, it can help against this type of thing. So it has become a second nature at this point. So you see this, The key strategy here is dividing those big threats. And right now, war dogs are a threat, the bats are a threat, they are away. So in this case, it's not bats, it's harpies, so even stronger. They need to be divided and eliminated by defeat in detail. That's exactly what's happening. We've got the hero blob hunting heroes. They took quite a bit of damage. They will not be able to beat the beastman blob over there, but they can definitely hold them up enough that the Outriders can do the damage to the rest of the army. Now, look at this beautiful encircling maneuver over here. And you see that problem that I just told you about with the entire army chasing one model if it's engaged. That's exactly what happened in those war dogs. So this is something that happens, and just stretching and giving the order minimizes the chance it will happen. One good thing to minimize that happening is enabling guard stands. Don't enable that on every unit because you want your melee units to be chasing, but you do want that enabled on your skirmishers. There was a bit of an urban myth some time back that defense, the guard mode, enabled them to shoot while they were in melee. That has never been the case, as it turns out. So, yep, you see the Manticore is the big threat. They are surrounding and pulling away those units. Even against a player, this would still work, not as effectively, and they will. This is why the actual counter to the Outrider spam is ranged infantry, because ranged infantry has more models and can do more damage to those Outriders. Them being a large target will make them take more damage from those arrows just by a sheer virtue of target size. And so that is why that is the counter and not these fast units. Because the speed on those Outriders will simply disable and allow them to divide and conquer any kind of threat you throw that way. So once again, we've got a repositioning. Make a bit of a distance. Pull what is known as a caracol maneuver. Stands for Spanish snail. It is a mounted cavalry with guns maneuver where they will pull apart, turn around, fire, and repeat. And when they are pulling that maneuver, they kind of look like a snail, hence the name. So that Manticore is fighting the Grenadier Outriders. Grenadier Outriders are much stronger against infantry formations than they are against single targets. For single targets, you will want traditional Outriders, and that is why I prefer the standard repeater Outriders instead of grenades. But considering that these are planning to fight Valkia, they will very likely be facing a lot of infantry. So, not the ideal composition, but it still gets the job done. One other beautiful thing about Outriders is that despite being primarily a skirmishing unit, they have decent mass, so they're able to do pretty decent impact damage on lower mass units. So if you see a unit wavering, such as you see the infantry over there, you can always switch to melee by default, holding the Alt key and giving the attack order, and that will make them engage in melee attack. So they can still be used as light cavalry. Completely supplanting the role of traditional light cavalry. That is why the meta in real world for a long time was mounted cavalry. By the way, I just realized I said mounted cavalry, I mean rifle-armed cavalry. Or skirmisher cav, as they are generally known in Total War. So yep, you want to keep your lines wide. When you have the control of the battlefield, of one side of the battlefield, you want to keep the ranks thin. and you want to get those much wider shots on the enemy. And you don't even need to give them the attack order, because just them reaching their location, they will automatically fire as long as they have fire at will enabled. Now we see how they're going to deal with single entity monsters, and they do have tremendous firepower to deal with those types of targets. All they have to do is not take friendly fire, just kite until they can finish the target off. Here, one very important thing is how you are positioning your own kiting units. You always want them perpendicular to the target so as to not take friendly fire. If you're standing between the target and your outriders, you will get friendly fire. Or even if you are standing behind the target. So you will want to have a little bit of an angle, like a 90-degree angle ideally, in order to create a safe engagement.